Good evening. Beautiful weather outside tonight, isn't it? So this weekend, our 8th graders were on their confirmation retreat up in Dahlonega at Camp Hidden Lake, and they were up there with Rita and Kate and Bridget and Tony. You were there too, weren't you? And Father Michael was there all weekend. He left on Friday. He got back like right before this Mass started. And so I said, great, you've been gone all weekend. I've been doing all the work, so go say Mass. And he gave me a look and just walked away. And, but here I am doing all the work while he's off having fun. And, I can sympathize with our man from the first reading, Job, how he suffered, right? Life was drudgery for him. No, of course, if we look to Job and we look to the suffering of Job and we see what God allowed to happen, God basically took Job and he handed him over to the devil. He said, here you go, Satan, torment him. And we wonder, why would God do that? Why would God just simply hand Job over? And we see how Job loses everything, right? He loses his family, he loses his animals, he loses his home, he loses his health, he loses everything. And yet he continues to trust in God. That takes a lot of faith. That takes a lot of strength to be able to do that. He's able to continue to trust in God even though he lost everything. Why would he do that? Well, I think we have to look to the second two readings, the reading from St. Paul and the Gospel, because on encountering God and encountering Jesus, we recognize that he is the one with the power. We recognize that he is the one with the plan. And so in the Gospel passage, we see Jesus healing and casting out demons, and people coming to him, people running to him. And then Jesus, of course, says to his apostles, now we have to go to the other villages and do the same. And then in the second reading, St. Paul says, if I preach the gospel, this is no reason for me to boast, for an obligation has been imposed upon me, and woe to me if I do not preach it. Woe to me if I do not proclaim the gospel. Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom of heaven, the proclamation of the gospel, the proclamation of the good news wasn't received well by all. In fact, it wasn't received well by most. Many rejected him. The powers and the authorities, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they plotted to kill him, and they did. Because the gospel is powerful. The gospel is very powerful. I often wonder, there's about 1,700 people that come to Mass here every weekend. How many of us have really, truly heard the gospel? Not just, oh yeah, I've heard the words, you read them, and Jesus went out and did something, and then he told a story, and he fixed somebody, and then went back about it. How many of us have really, truly heard the gospel, allowed the words of the good news to penetrate our hearts and to transform our lives? If we recognize what the gospel is, it is the good news, it's the proclamation of the good news. Is it really good news for us in our lives? Do we desire to share it with others as good news? Do we see that we have an obligation to share it? We recognize our need to proclaim the gospel. I oftentimes reflect on just kind of Catholic life in general, and how many of us really live an evangelical life. Whoa, wait a minute. Evangelicals, those are the people in the big warehouse churches with the TVs and the smoke machines. But I mean evangelical in the sense that we are living in a missional way, that we're being sent out into the world as apostles, that we're going to proclaim the gospel, that we're going to proclaim good news to the poor, that we're calling others to live a life with Christ. Sometimes it's very difficult to proclaim the gospel. Sometimes when we do proclaim the gospel authentically, people get offended, people get upset, people want to leave. It happened even in Jesus' day. And in the time and the culture in which we find ourselves living today, the gospel is particularly contrary. To strive to live the gospel in today's life is very contrary. Whether it be in school, whether it be at your place of work, whether it be just in the public square. We look, and Christianity is met with animosity, with suspicion, a lot like it was in the early church, met with animosity and suspicion. But yet we are called to continue to proclaim that good news. So how do we do that? Well, if we kind of boil it down to the basics of what it is that we're supposed to do, what's the story of God, right? We talk about the kerygma. It's a big Greek word that basically means just like the simple kernel of the gospel. And so we talk about charismatic preaching. And what is that? Well, God made me, right? That's step one. He made me in his image and likeness, right? He put us all here, gave us dominion over the earth. He made us. And then something went terribly wrong in the fall. Adam and Eve sinned, and everything was broken. Everything was ruined. That perfect creation that God had ordered and put together was destroyed. And man wandered around for millennia trying to figure out what to do. God slowly, bit by bit, revealed himself to the people Israel. He revealed himself so that he could prepare them to be rescued, to prepare them to be saved, to prepare them to be restored. And so he sends his son, Jesus Christ, who does what we can't do. He defeats sin and death, right? God dies to conquer sin, but God can't die. And so Jesus dies on the cross, thus rescuing us from our sinfulness, rescuing us from that which had broken, rescuing us from that which had gone wrong. And then finally, what is our response to that as Christians? How do we live our lives in a way in which we desire to dedicate ourselves completely to God? Not just for an hour on Sunday, not just here now while it's easy, but a complete and total dedication and devotion to God. That everything that I do, everything in my life stems from my desire to do God's will. Pretty sure if every single one of us were to reflect on the question right now, do I do everything that I can to do God's will in my life? We would say, oh no, there's that thing that keeps me from doing God's will. There's that TV that I like, right? Or there's that car, or there's that golf club, or there's that whatever it is. The activities, the busyness that prevent us from really, truly, completely dedicating ourselves to God and striving to do his will. And so what do? We have to continue to proclaim the gospel. We have to continue to hear the gospel. We have to continue to listen. And then we go out into the world and we proclaim that same gospel. That might mean that we get rejected. That might mean that we're, at one point, not going to be allowed to be part of polite society. But ultimately, we recognize that in doing God's will, striving to do his will, we are making ourselves holy. We are being sanctified. We are becoming saints. Everybody here should want to be a saint. Is there anybody here that doesn't want to be a saint? Good. I was going to ask, raise your hand if you want to be a saint, but then I was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to feel uncomfortable if we do that. So I'll just, yeah. And if you were the only one, like, I don't want to be a saint. But one day, hopefully there will be statues of us in churches. Imagine that. Lived a holy life, an example to others, diligently served God. And then God calls me to my heavenly homeland. And then the church says, that person was so holy, he's a saint. We know it. We know that person's in heaven. We should look at them. We should imitate them. We should look at the saints right now. We should look at St. Clare, St. Francis. We should look to St. John Paul II. Remember when we were alive and there was an extremely holy man walking the face of the earth? He and Mother Teresa, side by side. We had the opportunity to see holiness. I remember when I was 6, I saw John Paul II. I don't remember seeing him really. I just remember it was really boring because we had to sit outside in the sun at the Vatican for like 3 hours waiting for him to come through. But I saw holiness. I saw a man who is in heaven. Can we see that in ourselves? Or is religion just another thing we do? We have to strive to be different. We have to strive to be holy. On Thursday, I was up in Dalton at my old parish, my first parish, St. Joseph, and I was there talking to some of the folks in the religious ed staff and asking them some questions about stuff that we're trying to do here and what they're seeing there. And yeah, I said, does it seem like you're getting through to these kids? I said, no. We're just doing the same thing over and over and over again every year, trying to get through to these kids, trying to get through to the parents. In fact, the DRE told me that she was substituting for the confirmation class, and there she had 30 kids in front of her. She said, how many of you guys go to Mass? Not a single one raised their hand. She said, why are you here? I don't know. It's something for us to think about as we strive to be holy. We can't strive to be worldly and holy at the same time. We can't serve God and mammon. It's nice to serve mammon. It's nice to have things of the world. It's nice to have nice stuff. I like it. But at a certain point, we're called to recognize that we're not called to be here in this world. We're called to do something more. We're called to be saints. We're called to be holy. We're called to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. And that's a lot of work for us. That's a lot of time that we have to spend in prayer. We're coming up on Lent, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Think about what you're going to do for Lent. Make it so Lent does something this year. Don't just, all right, I'm going to give up chocolate. But like, give up YouTube. Yeah, that would be hard, wouldn't it? I think I'm going to give up YouTube. I've been thinking about it, and it's going to be really hard because there's nothing better that I love than to end my day sitting on my couch with the recliner out, with the cats on top of me, maybe a blanket, watching YouTube, watching videos about how to build stuff or like how airplanes work or how, to break apart an entire cow, what cuts of meat you can get from it, the steaks. I've watched multiple hour-plus videos on how to break down a cow. Because it's different if it's Wagyu or if it's what a waste of time. And I'm never going to do it. I'm never going to break down a cow. It's neat to know how it works, but I'm going to go to the butcher, and the butcher's going to do it for me. If we think about the ways that we spend our time in life, I could be spending that time in prayer. I could be spending that time reading. I could be spending that time maybe in conversation with somebody. I could be spending that time doing probably anything more, and it's going to be way more valuable. And then you finish one video and you're on to the next. And it's like, oh, look, here's how, the Colosseum was built. That's fun. But so what if we decided in our lives to really, really, really reorient ourselves? Say, I've heard the gospel. The gospel has affected me. The gospel has penetrated my heart. And I desire to do God's will. I desire to strive for holiness. I'm going to set aside whatever it is that prevents me from being holy. Whether it's YouTube or whether it's golf. Golf is full of four-letter words sometimes, right? So maybe it doesn't help us to be holy. Maybe it's, one of my other hobbies. Or can I better use that to glorify God? Can I use the gifts and the skills that God has given me to glorify Him? Sure. But at the same time, how can I recognize that I'm not building up what I can do here on this world, for this world, but rather I'm building it up for the sake of the kingdom of God? That I'm striving to be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. When I think about that, I'm going to be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect. That's what Jesus wants for me. That's ridiculous. None of us could ever do that. None of us could ever achieve that level of perfection because we're not God. And so we listen to the gospel, and Jesus comes and He takes on our sin so that we no longer have to suffer from sin. And He makes us like Him. He makes us like God. He divinizes us. That's the process of being made holy, is being made part of God. Maybe we've never thought of the gospel like that. When I hear it, when I say it sounds too good to be true, right? God made us. We screwed up. He fixed it. And now I just have to try to be like Him. That's it? And so when we recognize the suffering around us, right, when we recognize those Job moments, right, where life is just drudgery, it's like, oh, why do I do this? I punch the time clock, go to the widget factory, make the widgets, come home, pay the bills, cook, eat, go to sleep, wake up, do it all over again. life is drudgery. There's suffering in life. There's pain in life. There's sickness in life. There's death. And without Christ, life would be meaningless. Without God, without having heard the good news, what would there be? There'd just be this world and then the end. And so let us ask the Lord that he would continue to help us to have ears to hear, so that we may truly hear his good news, that it may be good news, that it may change us. We may hear it and say, oh, thank God. There's hope. And as we continue with this Holy Mass, let us ask the Lord that he would continue to give us the grace that we may always strive to do his will.